Hi, I'm Gordy Gundaker. Welcome to the Dirt Parlor Podcast.
Hi, I'm Don Martin. Welcome to the Dirt Parlor. And this thing is big.
Welcome to the Dirt Parlor. I am Gordy Gundaker here with my amazing podcast teammate, Don Martin. And we're back this week with another episode of the Dirt Parlor. And, for one, this show is going to be awesome. For everybody watching back home, you could probably see the shirt I'm wearing right here, what Don's got on. We have one of the legends of our sport coming on tonight in John Gill, which is just a throwback for me because I was, just a young whippersnapper running around the pit area when John Gill was getting it on, and with Dad and like we were just talking about Kevin Claycomb and all those guys that raced back then out of the Indiana area, and John Gill was a household name, absolutely, for one, but just he was a personality as well. He was himself all the time, or exactly what he wanted to the racetrack. And, man, I remember those days like they were yesterday, really. But going to be, really excited to have him on. But, first and foremost, we want to thank all of our great sponsors, Steve Martin with Nutrient Ag Solutions, Jeff Hoker with Hoker Trucking, Bodies by Skinny, Checkered Customs, Screen Printing and Embroidery, Reed Millard with Millard Family Chapels. So without any of them, none of this would be possible, and we get to do a lot of cool shit on this show, and tonight is not going to be any less of that to have a guy like John on our show.
I'm stoked. I've watched John Gill win a lot of races. When I watched your dad race and got to be around the wedge cars.
Yeah.
I think that's a big one thing we're going to be talking a little bit about. When you saw the Indiana one come into town at Tri-City Speedway, it I don't know, made the hair stand up a little bit. I mean, that's the one thing about Tri-City Speedway in those late 80s and early 90s. We got to see some of those, the Charlie Swartzes of the world. And this guy here is a pioneer of the sport.
Oh, yeah.
And, I mean, when you think of Summer Nationals going on right now, those days –
oh, yeah.
The Claycombs, the Jewels, the Barnetts, the Currys. And I don't think some people realize until you get into the meat of it. Your dad would know, because your dad will tell you in that late 80s, if you went to Brownstown, Indiana, you better have your shit together.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Because it was a hornet's nest just with the local guys.
Yeah.
They welcomed all.
Yeah.
And
yeah, because they weren't worried about you.
No. They knew that their little slick little quarter mile was they didn't care who showed up.
No.
I remember once Eddie Gibbons from South Carolina was winning everything out there. And I remember James Essick was the announcer. And I was stoked because I was like, man, Eddie Gibbons is coming to Brownstown, Indiana. And I remember James Essick looked at me and says, you got a fucking chance. He says, what you're about to see this weekend, all these guys from the Carolinas, that's Freddie. They're coming because of money. They got to come because the money's so great. But at the same time, they all know when they roll in there's about 25 guys in the Indiana that are ready to just rock and roll.
Well, I mean, you think about the guys that cut their teeth at Brownstown Speedway during that time. I think that's one of the crazy things when you look back to that, that day and age, that late 80s style is, there was a lot of hotbeds across the country that was like, if you went to Brownstown, Indiana, it was like you had 15 guys you had to deal with that raced at Brownstown every week. If you came to the Midwest, you had to race the guys that raced at Tri-City or, that little area. If you went to Iowa and had to go race up there with those guys, you went up there and got your ass handed to you. And it's a shame we probably don't have what we have today where we got to, really see all that stuff. But I think at the same time, that's what makes those guys as great as they were, because you hear all those stories about when the national touring guys would roll in there, or the big name guys, your Scott Bloomquist, and those guys would go into those areas. They were like, oh shit, this isn't just rolling into some local yokel place and we're going to snatch $5,000-$10,000 and walk out of here. The locals were taking it home every night.
Back in those days, Gordy, too, you would go to Brownstown in the late 80s and early 90s. It's like the Jackson 100. It was 100 cars.
Yeah.
And, you were just like in awe.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, in that era, we were lucky because we had guys like Roger Long that were able to leave Farmer City and compete. Bob Pierce.
Yep.
That's the other thing. I can't wait to talk to John a little bit about Bob and him a little bit.
Yeah.
This is going to be awesome.
Well, and, just the stories these guys have are so different than what we have today, right? Back then, and these guys were innovators. They were like we just talked about, wedge cars, right? I mean, they were doing stuff that's way different than the style of racing that we're doing today. And we're doing it on way different tires, big fucking tires. You know what I mean? Like they had sprint car tires on these race cars at points during those ages. And it's cool to see because the sport hadn't evolved like it has today. So back then it was way more of like being in tune with your race car and working on things and having to learn things. And you didn't go test for 4 days during the week. You didn't, you just raced. Those guys, that's how they got better, is they went and raced. They would get their ass kicked on Saturday, and they'd go back and they'd chop, cut, and rebuild on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and then they'd try again Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and if it was good, they might leave it. If it was bad, they'd go back and start all over again. So, it's going to be really neat just to hear, the insight of what, John has from all those days. And, I remember growing up, being really, really little, but my dad and John were good buddies. They raced together a lot, but just seeing that black and green 75 in there, and it brings back a lot of cool nostalgic memories for me, because that's the racing I grew up learning to love, and it's why I have a passion for it now. It is all those guys. I saw how they carried themselves. I saw how they worked on their cars. I saw how they raced each other, and it was, back then was really hard-nosed racing, but it was, I don't want to say it was more of a man's sport back then, but it was because those guys, you raced them, they all raced with respect, and if you didn't race them with respect, you got knocked the fuck out.
Yeah, I don't think you wanted to talk to Larry Moore after a race.
Hell no. No.
Both Larrys, Phillips or Moore. No. I wouldn't want to.
No, they didn't. They didn't want to talk. if you went over there to discuss something that you did to them on the racetrack, there was one thing it was going to, you were going to end up on your back, and that was it. Like I mean, that's the style that I grew up knowing, and that comes from these guys. You see exactly. That style, and every one of those, when you even talk to them today, right? You talk to the Bob Pierces of the world. You talk to, before Rayburn passed away, and all those guys, they were all hard-nosed competitors. All the way through the day they were done racing, and even still, that's how it was. It was in their blood that way, and it was a pure time of our sport, is really what it was.
It really was.
Yeah, and
that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, and I think that's why, like I said, I know that's why I love it as much as I do, is because I got to obviously be on the road with Dad a lot when I was growing up, but I got to meet and talk and hang out with all these guys and see how they went to the racetrack and how they were going about their business, and it was a neat time. And I'm super, super pumped to have John on here. It's gonna be awesome. I can only imagine where this conversation might go.
I have no idea.
It's gonna be a lot of fun. So
I don't think there's gonna be kind of any type of schedule. I think it's just gonna find something to hit on, and it's just gonna keep moving forward.
It'll probably be a lot of laughs and a lot of good stories. I know hopefully we can just pluck his brain on stories. And if we could probably just shut the mics off and let him talk, that might be the best way to do it.
Got to have a Bloomquist story tonight.
I
Those
guarantee
two guys being at MasterSbilt when it first started, it ought to be incredible.
Yeah,
that's when Scott had the hair almost down to his ass.
Yeah,
we all knew he liked the long hair, but that's when it was really
well. And you think too, like they, him and Scott put MasterSbilt on the map. And now that's a huge. Obviously, it's like MasterSbilt dominated for a long time with those guys at the helm of it, and they brought in how much more talent behind them.
Well, you looked at it when Scott and John were there, and they started doing what they were doing. You had John dominating a lot in the Midwest, Scott going on the national. Then you saw Boggs makes the switch to MasterSbilt. You just kept seeing more and more. Bob Pierce was a MasterSbilt guy for a long period of time too, and it was like Rayburn had that lock. Right. And all of a sudden, guys started filtering a little bit. Oh, yeah. The Aucklands were coming around. And it was a great time.
Oh, yeah.
And then you had Mark starting with Bullet, right? You had Mark Richards going, leaving Bullet to go with Rocket.
Right.
And it was a great time.
Oh, yeah. And it was a day of, like I just said, it was a day of innovation. That was back when, there was a lot more happening on those cars that was so different every week. Hell, back then I know, like, rack and pinions were just becoming a thing. Like, that wasn't something that was just like that's what these cars, like now, today you buy a car and you know exactly every component on it. Like, back then you didn't know what was going to happen. Like, you had, there was just so much different variety. And, I've looked at, I don't know how many old pictures of Dad's race cars that he was building, but Dad's got this super cool old notebook that's got newspaper clippings and all this stuff in it from the Half of Tampa days and UDTRA days and all this different stuff. And you look at the list of names that are results in these races, and you hear about the guys we talk about nowadays. It's like, oh, these guys were the legends. There was fucking 20 of them in every race that I looked at that were just guys that won hundreds of features.
Everything.
Yes. And it's like, man, I don't even, like, it's like how good it really was back then. I feel like sometimes it almost gets overshadowed just because it's not that day and age anymore. But man, those days were, just a lot of really, really, really good racers, a lot of really good fabricators, and guys that just lived, eat, and slept racing. That's all they knew. They didn't know anything else, and that's that's all they wanted to do. And so this is going to be really cool and neat to have a guy like John Gill on our show.
Well, I know he's a hero of yours, and without further ado, let's get this let's get the old man on the phone.
Heck yeah, let's do it. All right, so we got the modern day cowboy John Gill on the line here, and John, for one, we just want to thank you for hopping on the Dirt Parlor tonight with us. How's everything been going, man?
Well, it's just going. It's just here in Indiana, it's been hot. It's been awful hot. It's went from one extreme to another. It went from frost and 1 week to 90-degree weather on the same week, and it's really not let up since all that's happened. So it's been abnormally wet spring here in Indiana, just trying to get some work done and trying to fight the elements. That's about it.
Give us a day of your life. Tell us kind of like, you wake up in the morning now. What's John Gill doing on a daily basis?
Okay, for like right now, well, I got a business that I've been doing for about 8 years now, which was doing it part time, and now I'm retired from truck driving that I was doing also. I'm just trying to do this now, pretty much full time. But it's seasonal work, so it's only in the summer, which it's an asphalt maintenance business. You seal coat and crack fill parking lots, driveways, schools, that kind of stuff.
Obviously that all come to, after you got done racing, but what, do you keep up with everything that's going on these days? Do you watch the streams of races, or how's that all looking?
Yeah, I watch all the streaming, all the stuff I can watch. Yeah, pretty much. I usually go to a couple races every year at Florence and maybe one at Brownstown or something. Sometimes it just depends, but usually go to the north-south and a few races over there at Florence.
You always, when I remember it, just Brownstown and Florence, if you had to pick between one or the other, I know that's a tough one for you because I've seen you win races at both. Would you say you like one over the other?
Not really. Used to back in the day, they were both, when the King's dad, I can't remember his first name now, but anyways, when he was running the track, always had a good relationship with him and his wife, and now his son runs the track. He does a great job with it. But back in the day when Brownstown was in its peak, it was Roger Williams and his family, his wife and all. They ran the track, and as I started out racing at Brownstown, they they ran the track, and of course it's a fair track, but they had the lease there to run the track, and then of course James come along, and he had it for a year or so, and they all had their hand in the track after Roger was gone. But the best that track was ever prepared was when Roger Williams had it, and that's when it was one of the top 12 tracks in the nation, and it was a smooth track. It was always a racy track, and it didn't matter where you started over there. If your car was any good, you could come to the front, and that's just one of the things I like. But either of those two tracks, I mean, I've cut my teeth pretty much on both of them, but Brownstown's where I started at, and I got close ties there just from my roots more than anything. As a kid going and watch, I didn't ever go watch any, maybe once at Florence when I was young, but as a kid growing up, before I ever drove, I went to Brownstown a lot,
John, how'd you get into it? What made you wake up one day and say, I want to be a race car driver?
Well, I didn't. It doesn't really work like that. But as a kid, my mom took me when I was little, and went with my aunt, and her husband had a car, and that's how I went. My sister, my mom, we just looking for something to do on the weekends, and she went with her sister and said, well, we're going to go to the races, and we'd all load up in the car and take a blanket, and we'd go to the racetrack, and that's how it all kind of got started. And then after, I was probably 12 years old or something like that, maybe, and after I went a few times, I'm like, every week I'd be saying to my mom, hey, we're going to go with, Aunt Sarah to the races tonight, ain't we? Or this weekend. And I'm like, yeah, we'll see. And so anyways, I got to going, and then my dad bought a restaurant. She got where she couldn't take me, and I was just like a kid, anywhere I could find somebody to haul me around, I'd go. That's where I'd go, but that's how I got started going. Just my mom took me.
That's great,
man. So what was your first year of racing then? For the people back home listening, when was that first year you actually got behind the wheel of a race car?
In 1981, first time I got in a late model. It was about mid-season, and I had built a car with my uncle, actually, the guy that I started going with as a kid to watch his car, and a bunch of his boys, and which was my cousins, and a couple of my buddies. We worked and built a car from scratch, a brand new car, which was a late model. It was a Rayburn. We bought it at Rayburn's, but it was actually a Boyce chassis. It was a one-off car that Boyce built as a demo for CJ, and we ended up with that one-off frame. And that was when I started. That's what I started with, and he built the motor for it and everything. It's back when you built your own motors, and that's what we started out with. And that year there in '81, I went to Brownstown. My first time out in a car. First racetrack I went to was at Brownstown, and anyways, ended up that year and ended up getting Rookie of the Year that year at Brownstown, and that fall, they used to have race we raced 3 nights a week. When I started, we run Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and I came close to winning some races that year, but never had won one. And that year, at Hopstadt, they used to have an annual big race back then, 100-lapper. Most all your races closed with a big race, like the big show deal, which would be like, now would be like a Jackson 100 or North-South or whatever, It was a 2-day race at Hopstadt down at Tri-City Speedway there, Evansville, Tommy Helfrich's track now, which was his dad's back then. And Tommy was racing, and anyways, 2-day race called the Thrust Industries 100 was their annual big race, and we went down there, and I was lucky enough to win that race there the first year I started, which was back then was $3,000, and that was the first time I'd won a feature, but that was starting the first year. So
then you had an itch you had to scratch after that, right?
Oh yeah, it was on like Donkey Kong, man. Yeah. Yeah.
Then you went into, when did you hook up with, when I remember seeing you with in the Dalton gang car, the 96, and the car that Kenny Simpson drove for them too, I believe, right?
Yeah, correct. Yep. And then he passed away in '84, and Don Hobbs drove it in '85, and then I got hooked up with Gene, and I started driving it in '86.
You know, I always remember about this, and Gordy probably naturally wouldn't know this, but you were on an open wheel trailer, and I still remember this, and there was a sticker on the trailer that said UMP is unfair to car owners.
Yeah, he had it painted on the trailer because see what happened was he was pissed because they didn't give owner points. There was only driver points. And so it's kind of ironic how it all started, and that's why he had it on there. And of course, you know, when UMP started, if you was a member, you got a weekly letter, and they always give like a rundown of all the points and everything of what went on that week, as to each state and which, you know, drivers and the whole national deal and the whole deal, you know, was, you know, kind of a big deal.
It was a big deal.
Yeah, and of course it was, I don't remember how many states, 7, 8 states. It included, you know, drivers from Kentucky, Indiana, Tennessee, Ohio, Michigan, Illinois, Minnesota, maybe Wisconsin, I'm not sure. And that's pretty much where all the tracks were in the UMP points deal. So, you know, even though I was in Indiana, I was competing against drivers in Kentucky and Ohio and Illinois, and the first 2 years of the points, Gary Webb won, and he's from like Quad Cities or somewhere right in that area there. And anyways, I never even knew who Gary Webb was, but I raced again. You know, I was in points battle with him. You know, and the year that I won it, which my first year I won it was in '86 when I drove for Gene. That's how first time I met him, even though he had won it 2 years in a row and all. And I had never really run the points, you know, and until '86. But anyways, that's how I met a lot of different people, raced a lot of different tracks, and we ran in '86 there. Me and Gene, we took off and run the Summer Nationals that year and won the Summer Nationals in '86. And so, you know, that was kind of a big deal to take off in a cube van and an open trailer and a bunch of parts and try to have enough shit to race for, you know, 3 or 4 weeks in a row, different tracks all over the country, and travel around, and, you know, no air conditioning. It's a lot different it is today, I can tell you that.
Yeah, you know, that's something we were just talking about is you know, back then, obviously, the word I used with Dom was that the racing was pure back then. You know, it was a lot of guys that really just, you know, they just loved racing, but they worked on their own stuff. They were fabricating. You know, one of the things I just mentioned was that you go to the racetrack on a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and you weren't any good. You went home and just started doing a little chop cut rebuild and figuring out what you needed to change up for the next week, and you didn't know if it was going to be any good or not, but you were going to sure as hell give it a shot, and if it was good, you stuck with it. If it wasn't, you went back home and chopped it up again.
Yeah, and you know, and a lot different back in those days. You know, the cars were 2,400 pounds. Most of it was 2,400 pounds back then. You know, 2,350, 2,400 pounds, and no. Of course, in the beginning of UMP, it was for the cheaper grade of races. It was try to help the racer out. You know, no aluminum blocks, no belt drive fuel pumps, so you couldn't run a big motor. So you know, you was basically still with a stock block. You know what I'm saying? And so, and all the cars back in those days, I mean, there was power steering out there, but I never did ever run it. I didn't never run power steering until they got these cars where they were all rocked over and all that. I mean, back it was up in the around 2000 or so before I ever started running the power steering. You know, 98 to right around 2000. But you know, you race, you know, 20, 30 nights in a row with no power steering, and you know, and all that, you know, it's a lot different than it is today. It eliminated a lot of those kids, you know what I'm saying? I mean, because number one, they couldn't hang long enough. You know, you get on a rough track or something, they couldn't do it.
Yep. Oh yeah.
I mean, so now you got kids, you got girls, you got whatever. I mean, you can drive them with one finger. So it's that's where we're at.
Well, you know,
Go-kart steering wheels. One finger.
You're not wrong though. There's a lot of guys these days that I know that race with one hand or a little tiny steering wheel, and you know, my old man was always harping on me because there's a couple of times when I started out, you know, in 16, 17 running the Summer Nationals. Actually, I'll never forget it. I run Kankakee, and I lost power steering on like the fourth lap. Me and Little Pierce were racing for the lead, and I thought, man, there's no way in hell I can pull off this racetrack, because if I pull off here and tell Dad I didn't have no power steering, he's just going to tell me what a pussy I am. And so I run the whole race. I end up running fourth, but the problem was he didn't know I didn't have power steering, and so, you know, these cars these days are a lot harder, I feel like, because they're, you know, there's so much more down in the racetrack to steer and stuff, and it was kind of choppy that night, and I got done, and Dad comes up to the window and he leans in. He said, "What in the hell were you doing? You should have won that damn race." And I'm like, man, I didn't have no power steering from like the fourth lap. And he says, "Oh, you are such a pussy. I never ran with power steering my entire life." Yeah, oh my God, Jesus. So
yeah, I mean, that's where it's. I mean, but you know, back in those days, the power steering wasn't what it is today. You know what I'm saying? And you know, we still ran rack and pinion. I mean, originally, you know, back in '81 and all, I mean, probably when your dad started, you know, we had steering box, you know.
Oh, yeah.
And then we graduated from that in '83 to rack and pinion. Then I've had rack and pinion always ever since. But, you know, the rack and pinion is a lot quicker than the box was. And even when you go from the quicker the steering is, the harder it is to hold on to it, you know.
Oh, yeah.
And you go racing those rough tracks, and you know, of course, they'd like the cars were a little heavier, but true, they wasn't pinned over on the right front like they are today. I mean, I don't know if you could drive one today or not, you know, without power steering. I have no idea. They don't even make a manual rack, I don't think, without power steering anymore, you know. And but you know, if you go look at 99% of all these cars today, they've all got those little steering wheels on them, and you know, the power's pretty soft in them, you know. Yeah. And but that's the difference, you know what I'm saying? That was the difference in back when I ran the Summer Nationals the first time. You know, was no power steering, and we had no air conditioning in the hauler, and you know, had a bunch of kids with us that were off from school, and they'd come and go, and they, you know, some of them would come and hang out for 2 or 3 days or a weekend, and then they'd go home, and next week maybe there'd be some more kids show up, and it's just whatever you could get. But at the end of the day, there was just usually me and Gene and two or three, one or two other guys, and then in '89 when I ran the Summer Nationals, I drove for Godsey, and that's when I met your dad. Really, the first time we was racing Summer Nationals at, I don't know, Granite City or some white city or somewhere over in there, and we got tore up, and he was generous enough to let us come to his shop there in St. Louis and work on the car for a day and try to rebuild the interior and whatever else was tore up on it. Well, I think we got some sheet metal from him, and maybe we done some welding. I don't know. It was back then you didn't carry around spare door bars and bumpers. You just fixed what you had and kept going.
Yep. Oh yeah. I know Dad has always talked about that. The time you guys came to the shop. Obviously you guys ended up racing together quite a bit throughout your careers, and he always, there's a few guys I think he talks about that he held high regard for at the end of the day, and you were definitely one of them. But he talked about racing up and down the Summer Nationals with you, and I bet I've heard the story probably 50 times of the time you come to the shop, but it never gets old to me because it's such a cool thing to think about back then. Is that you didn't have no cell phone to call nobody and say you needed parts mailed to you or whatever else it was, or send a text message. It was like, well, I got to either find a shop or we're just going to figure it out while we're out here on the road. You weren't carrying a trailer full of spare parts like we do now, and it's cool to kind of live back some of those memories and those days of what racing was really like for you guys, because it was to me, it was a lot more hard-nosed, guys that you really had to want to be out there and willing to go up and down the road the way you guys did it back then, because you like you just said, you guys raced all the time with far less equipment and stuff that we had, and if you had motor problems, you were rebuilding them in hotel rooms or parking lots or whatever else.
Yeah, we didn't have a pit lift to just pop the car up there. You had to carry around jack stands and a jack. Everybody done it that way, and there's just a lot more easier way of racing today than there is. We didn't have a crash car. We didn't have room for a crash car to start with. Wasn't no such thing. You just had a bunch of shit thrown in the floor of the trailer or in the truck under the mattress or whatever, and try to carry enough metal with you could dispatch back something and keep going, or go to somebody's shop that was generous enough to let you come and work on it, and it's like we raced at St. Charles, Missouri, and White City, Granite City, and then Peevely, and all around out there, and you do a different track every night from home. I was basically just a small little trailer and a few tires, and we was dismounting tires every day and every night, trying to come up with something. And back then we had better tires. You could run them for 3 or 4 nights, or so. Oh yeah. And a lot of difference, in that type of racing back then. And you made do with what you had. If you didn't have new tires, you turned them around and run them the other way.
Yep. Oh yeah.
Do you got a good story, with you and Kevin? Is there one you can share kind of with everyone, a John Gill and Kevin Gundaker, a little story for everyone?
Well, I was at Grant City once on a Wednesday night, I think, or Tuesday. They had a midweek show, and him and Larry Phillips, they used to battle. Those two competitors that was hard on it over there. Every time I go in that direction, I was always having to. They were the ones you had to race, to win. And it was, I can't remember if it was Tuesday or Wednesday. I know it was coming up on they were having a big race at Santa Fe that coming week. It was going to be televised, and we were going to go to Granite City and then up to Santa Fe, and I'd never been to Santa Fe before. And I was running third. Them two were racing for the lead, and they got. Of course, we was at Granite City, and the dirt was black, in the big half mile. Yep. And we got the white flag, and I come down the backstretch, and they went into 3 and 4, and I was settled in to run third. You know what I'm saying? And them two were they were bumping and grinding up there for the lead, for the win, and I don't know which one of them, somebody turned the lap car.
It was my dad.
Yeah. And it spun out, and it's setting around the corner. As I entered into turn 3, it's back. He's spun out, and he's backwards with his ass up to the wall, and the nose of the car is facing me. Well, the whole front of the car is covered with black dirt. Well, hell, I didn't even much more than see it. Of course, he didn't have a race receiver, and they didn't throw the yellow because them cars were coming for the checkered. And so as I entered the corner, you're running probably 120 mile an hour or so, and here's this car spun out, half out, he's half broadside in the track. I'm like, oh shit, I'm going to hit this guy. and I'm like, I get on the brakes and I get sideways, and I'm going to hit this dude right in the nose, and I hit him with the right rear, right in the left front kind of area of his car, and it ramps me over his nose and spins me around. And of course, here comes the whole field. You know what I'm saying? And the green's still out. Here these guys come, and somebody piled me right into the front. I mean, hit me head on, and it knocks the seat out of the car. And when I hit the other car, it busted the battery in my car, and it's on fire. And I'm sitting there, and I'm tore all to hell. My car had to have a front clip and a back clip. And so I'm like, this all happens, in the blink of an eye. And I'm sitting in the car, and I'm trying to get my breath, and it knocked the seat, the bracket that held the seat in, it knocked it plumb through the seat. It was lucky enough, it was aluminum seat, but it punched it right through the back of the seat. And I'm trying to get my belts loose and trying to get my breath, and this guy comes up and he's pulling on me, trying to get me out of the car, and I said, hold on, let me get out of here. I get out on my own. He said, well, you might hurry up, you're on fire. I'm like, yeah, okay, I will, speed up. And but anyways, we had to go back we didn't go to Santa Fe the next day, or we went back to the jig. It took 2 records to get me back to the truck and put back where we could get it even on the trailer. But that was back when we run them Marsh wheels and plastic wheels.
Marsh wheels, the bright orange ones, right?
Yeah.
They were knocked off of it. I think I had 3 flats out of 4 tires, and they had me picked up in the front and the back to get me back to the truck. But anyways, yeah, that was from help from them 2 guys. I don't know.
Oh shit! I tell you what, it's the same deal. I've heard that before from Dad, because I know back then Dad and Larry Phillips, hell, they were rivals as rivals could be when it come to racing at Granite City, and neither one of them was willing to give each other an inch.
Oh no. Larry Phillips was a hard racer too, but let me tell you.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And you hear all the stories about Larry, coming out of Springfield and all that stuff, and just the way he raced, and he was, didn't take no shit from nobody, and definitely wasn't gonna give you an inch, but he'd make sure he took a foot if he was gonna take it.
Oh yeah, he was always. After I got to know him, Larry, I'd sat with him on a few rainouts and listened to a lot of stories that he had, and he was something else, that guy was. And I think the night that in '89 we raced at Peevely in the Summer Nationals, it rained that night. It rained a little bit before the races, and then it rained right after the races. And we used to pit in the infield, and when we were coming out, they had to pull him out. He had a bigger truck. He had a little bigger than a cube van. He'd kind of advanced a little bit there on a haul truck, and anyways, they had to, I don't know if the wrecker or tractor or something had to pull him out. Well, when they did, his trailer slid over and it got into the walls. You come out of the track from the infield and put a big gouge down the side of the trailer. and then, of course, I don't remember, he'd had trouble with his car that night or something, and it was a whole big rigmarole that night in the race. It was I think I ended up third or something in the Summer Nationals race, and there was kind of a conflict of who won the race, and had some problems with the scoring and all that. Of course, it had rained and stuff, and so Larry had went to a truck stop somewhere and parked that night after he left the track and got his trailer tore up, and he was parked in this truck stop, and then the next morning he was asleep in the truck, and some truck driver backed into the front of his truck and busted the whole, it had a tilt front end on his truck, and it busted that doghouse on his truck and cracked it and tore it up, and it woke him. He was asleep, and he woke up to all that going on, and he said by the time he got his clothes on and got outside, the guy drove off in the truck, and he said, here I am sitting here with the race car blowed up, trailer tore up, and my damn truck all tore up. He said, how could it get any worse than that? I said, yeah, you got a point.
Man.
But it was coming over there and racing with Larry, and then of course he had raced with the Wallaces. He had a lot of stories to tell about the racing with Kenny and Wallace and all them. Mike Wallace's dad, them as they before they ever come along, and then of course Mike Wallace was racing late models when I was over there running. He was driving that red 6 car back in the day.
Yep.
And he didn't care for him. He said, he's a product of his dad. His dad and me, we didn't get along, and he had all kinds of stories. But I guess they kind of made amends as he got older, I guess. But he had some stories to tell about that.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, man,
We did a cool race we did a Russ Wallace memorial after he passed away. We've had one at our track every year since he passed, but a couple of years ago we did one, and both Trevor and I, my little brother, we wrapped our cars like Russ's old cars, and they had Rusty, Mike, Kenny were all there. Their mom came, and it was a really neat deal. And when Mike came up, we unveiled the cars, and Trevor had the red 6 on his. Well, Trevor's a little more wild than I am, and Mike looked over at Trevor and said, "I hope you beat the shit out of that thing. I never liked driving that red 6." No.
Yeah, I know. See, I never did ever meet Rusty, but I raced against Mike, and then Kenny was younger. I never did ever see him around over there any, but I guess he was down in Charlotte, down in that area already, running the asphalt cars. But Larry told me stories that he raced against their dad when there was them tracks were asphalt, and then he raced against them when started out when they were dirt, and then they went to asphalt. Some of them went back to that, and then they went to dirt and then back to asphalt. So he said, I've raced on some tracks 3 different times, 3 different kinds of surface,
Oh, yeah.
and but he told stories about their dad, and then he had to race against Mike and all. But Larry was a character, I can tell you that.
Oh, yeah.
Did you like the Tri-City big old half mile? Did you like going around that joint?
Coming over there, yeah, I got a trophy here.
That's awesome.
The dude, I won a race there in the midweek race. The guy that used to run it in the 90s, Winnie's.
Yep. Bob Winnie.
He promoted St. Charles as well. They had midget cars or something.
Yep.
His brother did, maybe.
Yep.
And anyways, it was sponsored by Skull. They used to have a Skull race, like a midweek race there. And I got a spittoon as a trophy, chewing.
No kidding.
That's awesome.
That's awesome. That's some cool stuff. Yeah,
awesome.
Terry raced USAC midgets for a long time with the skull on the car. So.
But yeah, I love that big track. Yeah. And I never raced on it since they downsized, of course. But they had that little track that they used to. originally we still run the cautions around the big track, and then finally there a few times they got to taking us in there and running us around that little track some on the yellow.
Oh yeah, that was hell. I remember that. That's where I grew up going and watching all those. Hell, but the cautions around the half mile, it would take you 10 minutes till you go back green. So finally they had to cut into the show a little bit. They're like, what in the hell are we doing? But that.
Hey, them cars haul ass around that big track, though. Let me tell you.
Yeah, I tell you what, that's the one thing about that old half mile. You know, that place was not for the faint of heart. You know, you had to be a wheelman and on the gas if you wanted to be up front at those places.
Yeah, when the first time I ever came there was in '86 when I drove the '96 car. We came there to run the Summer Nationals and some of those races, and that's the first time I came over there. But that was a different style of track than what I was used to around in my neck of the woods. But I sure liked it. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
You know John, we got to talk about the Indiana One Days, man, dude. It was like one of the iconic cars, man, when you drove for Keith and Tater, and then you had Scott. You know, you two guys both. You know, he was in the MasterSbilt and that, and I was telling Gordy, I go, dude, that was when Scott had hair that you probably didn't even know how long it was, but
well, it looked long back in the day because everybody had short hair back then, but it really, in today's standard, it wasn't that long. You know what I'm saying? But
yep.
His was definitely longer. But that's when I first met him. Of course, was in the 80s there when I drove that car. That was in '87 when I drove.
Yep.
When I drove that car the first time, and we didn't run the Summer Nationals. We ran a couple of races that year. We came in for the Herald Review race over there.
Gordy loves Macon, by the way. Gordy loves Macon.
I got 2 Herald Reviews in my bag.
Oh yeah,
yep.
Wins? Yeah. I never won one there. I've only been there 2 or 3 times, but I had a good run going that year in '87, and I got wrecked by Mike Wallace, and right at the end, he was a lap car and come out of the infield. I was running third, and he got me. But anyways, but we went back a few more times, I think, and I don't remember, several different times. I'll tell you one on talking about Scott. I can't remember the first time he won the Herald Review race was in '90. I do believe the year was
correct.
in 1990. And I had took off with one guy, me and one dude, and that was working on my car, and we was going to run the Summer Nationals, and I had a Rayburn car at the time, and we'd went somewhere. I was trying to think where we raced the night before we went to Macon. I don't remember. I had trouble with my car. It was in Peoria is where we were at. Somebody's garage. Some guy had come and said, hey, you guys need to work on your cars. Come to my place. And it was a big old garage, like a big old factory type, a big old factory, you know, big shed. But they only had one motor hoist. And Scott, he changed the motor that day. And I don't know, we worked on my car, and me and this Bill that was helping me at the time. And Scott, he stroked me around and held me up the whole friggin' day because I didn't want to go to Macon, but I was going. You know what I'm saying? And he goes, you don't want to go, so don't worry about it. I go, you know I'm going. Just, hurry up. Well, he dicks me around, waits around till last minute. And then when they got done, then it was okay, well, they're in the big hurry. They go to the track. Well, long story short, we get there, and so for the rules that year of the track, they used to let people go in, take tires and wheels, and their pit crew go in, and they had like a hot pit in the infield. Well, this year they decided that wasn't going to happen. Now, you could take a tire and wheel or tires and wheels in there and a jack or lug wrench, whatever, but no people were allowed in the infield. If he was going to change anything, the driver had to get out and do it himself, or if another driver had retired and he was in the infield, if they wanted to be generous enough to help you, they could help you. You know what I'm saying? So long story short, I didn't take no shit in the infield. When I got done to that joint, I was well done. So I didn't want no more of it. So, anyways, he did. He took some tires and wheels in there, and a jack and a lug wrench, and of course, no impacts back then, right? You know, he had just the little spinner lug wrench deal, and a jack, and he stacked his shit in there, and there were several of them in there had stuff. And meanwhile, my car, I don't remember what happened to it, if I broke something or motor give me some more trouble or whatever, but I retired and went to the infield. And just as I got to the infield, Scotty, he has a flat tire on the left rear or right rear one. And he pulls up to his stack of stuff, and there was some other dude that was a driver that had fell out of the race, and he was crippled up somehow. He only had one arm. He either had a Band-Aid, or he had, he was wrapped up, or he was in a cast. I don't remember. The dude was one-handed, is all I remember. And Scott's trying to get this guy pointing at his shit, telling him what he wants. Well, I seen it going on, so I ran over there, and I communicated with him and jacked the car up and changed the tire, and he goes back out and don't lose. He gets started on the tail, and long story short, he comes from the tail and wins the race. So, like the gypsies we are, we're all traveling down the road that night after the races, and just so happened we wheel in the same truck stop he's at, and gas up my truck and park, and me and my guy, we're going to go in there and get something to eat. Well, we go in there, and there sat Scott and his mom, and Scott had 3 or 4 guys with him that traveling with him, and they're all sitting there at a table. And so me and Bill sat across from them, and we get our dinner and we eat. We get up to leave, and I go over there and take my ticket and lay it down on the table. And Scott, being the prick that he was, sometimes he kind of looks at that receipt, he goes, "Well, you want me to do that?" I said, "I want you to pay for it." And he goes, "I ain't paying for your damn food." I said, "Well, you wouldn't have won that race tonight if I hadn't changed that tire." I said, "Now, you want to be that way? You ain't going to buy my dinner and me and Bill's dinner, and I changed your tire, and you won." I don't remember how much that race paid back then, but it was quite a bit more than average, you know what I'm saying? And his mom said, "Scott, pick up the ticket." And she shunned him into it, and he paid for her dinner that night. I said, "I appreciate that." And I left, but yeah, he wasn't going to pay it,
You'd have been better off telling him whenever he reached in there to tell you needed to change the tire, to tell him that, well, if you let me on the hoist earlier, I might have changed it and just left him sit there.
I shouldn't even went over there. That's what I should have done. But a guy just kind of he just kind of gets roped into it. I seen another guy he wasn't going to be able to do it. He was struggling trying to get the car jacked up, and he only had that one hand working. And I went over there and went ahead and done it for him. But yeah, it's Scott, he could be hard to get along with sometimes. It was just his nature,
Oh, man.
You know that he looked up to you. He always, I think when you look back, I don't think there's too many people in the pit area can say anything bad about John Gill.
You're right.
I mean, that is the one thing, John, that you have. I mean, even your peers, I don't think there's ever anybody that could say anything bad about you. We're always classy, just like what we're hearing you doing that for Scott, that doesn't surprise me. I mean, I look at 2 guys that were run number 75, you and Bart Hartman. And I think both of you guys, there's a lot of similarities between the two, because you guys helped everybody.
Yeah.
And and I think it goes a long way. I mean, like I said, those Indiana 1 days, I mean, the wedge cars, and I look at it, my childhood, I mean, it just, and you throw Larry Phillips out there, and then, I remember the first times my dad took me to Brownstown, for the Kenny Simpson race. And that's where I got to see the guys like Mike Duvall and people like that, seeing the Flintstone Flyer flying into town and seeing Freddie. And that's when I realized, when I would go in those late 90s, after I'd already been there a few times, it's then starting to get very comfortable and knowing the sport. That's when I became like, when you would go to Brownstown on those Saturday night races for those ones that paid like the Kenny Simpson race and the Jackson, when you have 100 cars, and man, dude, you see Jeff Purvis and all those guys come in. The Clay Combs and the Jewels and the Jim Currys of the world and the Barnetts, like Gordy and I were talking, they were licking their chops when these guys come into town. Yep. They weren't intimidated by him. They wanted them there.
It was different at Brownstown. A lot of those guys really, I mean, Donnie Moran, he's never won a race at Brownstown. I mean, that says a lot. You know what I'm saying? It was a hard track to come into. Freddie Smith, I don't think ever won a race there. We had, it was a different type of dirt. It was just a different style of racing that you had to get accustomed to run at that track at Brownstown. But a lot of guys did figure it out. I mean, Scott did. Jack Boggs, he figured it out. Purvis, he was good there. But a lot of, but they all come there. You know what I'm saying? They
absolutely.
all came there, and I mean, we talked about Tommy Helfrich, and as good as he was at Grant City and Paducah and Eldora, and numerous, hundreds of races he won at Hofstadt, small tracks and Chandler and places. He come to Brownstown and he would falter. He just stumbled there a lot. And as a kid, when I was going to watch, he always had such a beautiful car. It was always kind of a dark blue or light blue colored car.
That's 71.
Meticulous. Yeah, meticulous. I mean, beautiful car. And he'd come there and he'd have that car loaded up and going down the track before the race was ever over. I mean, time and time again, I seen him hauling. He'd be leaving when the race was still going on. But yeah, it was a different kind of style of racing there at Brownstown. I don't recall your dad running there much, if any. But I'm sure he didn't have no luck there either at Brownstown if he came, but I don't remember him being there much.
Yeah, I don't know if, I don't know. I think he is, he had gone, but I don't think he went there often because it's the same deal. He didn't go over there and have a lot of success, on that side. His bread and butter was more that Illinois area and up in up in Iowa at Oski and White City and those types of places. He didn't seem to venture out too far east. He'd come to Eldora and those places.
Right.
He still talks about the one that got away in '82 that he should have won the World 100. And I know that haunts him to this day, but but back then, you could go race up in Iowa. Actually, the funny story is, the reason he ended up in Iowa was because they banned him from Tri-City there for a little bit. He got thrown out of there and they suspended him, and he ended up going up north into Iowa to go race. I cannot remember whose shop he stayed at, but in Iowa you used to be able to race 7 days a week, and he would race. They would race every day. That just nonstop, and he did that for about 2 years, and that's where he talks about a lot of his success come from up there racing with those guys. It made him good when he came back to to the Midwest, the Illinois areas. So but I don't think he went to Brownstown a whole lot. I know he was definitely there probably a few times when he was participating. Wasn't in the race, but it just was I don't know. Obviously, the cars, that you guys raced from, 81, 82 up into the 90s, they did change a lot, from your wedge cars and, all the little bit of technology that changed. Like you said, the rack and pinions. I was talking about that earlier. I know Dad built a rack and pinion car in the late 80s. And he said, like he talks about it, is like it was one of the first ones that ever had it. He swears up and down it was the first. I'm sure there was somebody else that was doing it, but that was a big change in those days. And, for you, did like the transition of change, from the wedge cars to your more standard style late model, was that a big change for you, or did it seem to kind of go, swimmingly?
Well, I had been racing long. I started out before the wedge cars.
Mm-hmm.
And so then we went kind of right into the wedge cars just as soon as I started in 81. In 82, they kind of started putting the bigger body. Everybody just, the more metal you could put on them, the more downforce you could get, more everything. It was progressive weekly.
Yep. Oh yeah.
The best way to put it,
That's
and
a good
I was
way of
in the
putting it.
spot around that Brownstown area there was the hotbed for kind of all of it. I'm racing against, on a weekly basis, I'm racing against Ray Godsey, Gene, and Russ Petro, and guys that were really, really, really good in the wedge cars. Plus Jim Curry, plus Kenny Simpson,
Ira Baston.
plus Don Hobbs, plus Ira Baston. I mean, these guys were veterans that were good, and they were weekly competitors at Brownstown. I mean, that's the Saturday night. That was the part of the Saturday night show every Saturday at Brownstown. Kenny Simpson, Don Hobbs, Jim Curry, Ray Godsey,
Mike
Russ
Jewell.
Petro,
Gosh.
Gerald Dixon. Those guys were, and several other guys that were in this area, but those were the main ones.
Right.
Them guys could win anywhere. So that's how I got. That's who I raced against. You know what I'm saying? And not just one guy, but a whole bunch of them. And
It was like Paul Schaefer was underrated. I mean, because he raced.
he came there every week, drove all the way from up at Portage, Indiana, down to Brownstown every Saturday night, and then he would go to Hopstad on Sunday.
He had that big beard going with the curly hair, man, dude.
He had the perm.
He had the big perm.
They called him the big perm back
That's
in the day.
That's right.
Love
the number. Did you remember the 20th car? The 20, all green and white, man. It was beautiful.
That's awesome.
It's beautiful. And then you had, like I said, then you were Godsey's the K. I mean, the K1 car, dude. It's about as iconic as it gets, man.
Yeah.
You see the King
and
car
see-
come in, man, dude. You're just like, ah.
Yeah.
Petro drove it some too after Ray.
Yep.
Ray quit driving for. Ray kind of drove it for King and Fred King, and then Russ started driving it, and then Russ. I don't remember what happened with Russ, and then Ray started driving it again, and then that's how I started. That's how I got into that car for driving for Ray. He had an accident that year. He was driving the King car, and that was in 1989, and I didn't actually have a car to drive at the time. It was early in the year, and the first race, I think, of the year at Hopstad, Ray was down there racing, and of course they run sprint cars and late models at Hopstad every Sunday. And Ray had his car on jack stands underneath of it working, and some guy come through the pits in a sprint car and couldn't make the curve. He was trying to turn it against the stagger. He was trying to turn to the left, and the car, had the big tire on the right there. He couldn't turn it, and he plowed off. He was, a rookie, and he plowed into Godsey's car and knocked it off the jacks, and Godsey was under it. And it's a wonder it didn't kill him. I mean, it fell right on top of him, and lucky for him, there was several guys around there that was pitted next to him, and they all ran over there and grabbed hold of that car and just picked it up and got Ray out from under it just instantly. And so he had several broken ribs, and Ray didn't have a job. He hadn't had, he was racing for a living, and I had the bar, and I didn't race for the money anyway. At that time, I loved it. I didn't care to race. All I could race, I wasn't in it for the money. I was just in it to race, And anyways, I called Ray, and that's how I got started driving for Ray. Is he couldn't drive at that point, And so I kind of started. I said, well, when you can feel like you can work on it, I'll drive it. You don't have to pay me. I'll just drive it. That way you can get some income coming. And
What a guy, John.
he had a wife and kids at home and no income, and so.
John, that's awesome. That is just awesome.
That's wild. That's crazy.
That just tells you the band of brothers.
Did you at least do good?
Hey, it was one of the best years I ever had. Buddy.
Am I right though? Was that chassis an American made? Was that an American made?
Yeah, it was Fred's car, and Fred had started building American made frames, and so.
I remember like Denny Felker and those guys from like Joplin, Missouri.
Fred sold it to Denny Felker, the American-made chassis business. He sold it to him.
Man,
oh my God,
that's crazy! Wow, I'll be honest. I'm not sure there's a lot of people out there that really know that story. At the end of the day, but where did the 75 end up coming into play?
Okay, well, originally when I first started my uncle's car, it was 75. Whenever Curry drove that car when I was 12 years old. Jim Curry drove for my uncle, and that was my uncle's number. And it was actually a number of a guy's number from town here. His name was Cecil Beavers. A sprint car here in town. His number was 57. So Claude just took that number and turned it around and made a 75, and that's how he got the number. And so as a kid starting racing, I grew up watching him run, and so when I started to drive that for him, we built that first car. I put that's the number I wanted on my car, and so I drove that number until I drove for Gene, and then his car, as a kid, I watched his car run every Saturday night up there at Brownstown, and it was always 96. So when I drove his car, I went with his number, and then whenever I drove, in 86, I won the UMP championship in Gene's car, and so we kind of split up there at the end of the year, and Keith and Tater asked me to drive their car, the house car for MasterSbilt, and they had built a show car just to take around and put that Indiana 1 on it, and I drove that car in 87 and won the UMP championship in that car with their number. And then in 88, Scott had won the World 100, and we just had a lot of trouble in 88, and they were busy building cars, and their heart wasn't in it. You know what I'm saying? Not to run a car, and it showed. We went from winning. We raced 80 some times in 87 that year. That's a lot of racing back in those days. You know what I'm saying? With a cube van truck and no air condition, and like it was, and then in 88 we started out, we wasn't doing so good. We didn't win too many races. I think I won 30 races that year, close right at 30 races in 87, and then the next year we couldn't duplicate it, so 89 rolls around, and they was like him hauling around, well, we're going to build a car, and that's how I was sitting there idle when Gotze got hurt. I didn't actually have a car, at the time to drive. And me and Ray had been competitors, and we wasn't buddies by no means. We were competitors, and when he got hurt, I thought, well, it's time to bury the hatchet. This guy needs some help, and he had a good car, and Fred, I knew Fred some, not well, but I knew of him. I knew him, and I knew they always had good cars, and that's how I started driving for Ray. And then after I started, we won a few races, and Ray said, hey, look, I want to start paying you. I want you to drive for me, permanently, full time. And we won the Summer Nationals that year. We won, I think, 7 of the races in the Summer Nationals.
Oh, you guys were hotter than shit that year, dude. I still remember it, man. Didn't matter. Willie Kraft was in the period or whatever. Bill Fry, didn't matter. Gill was taking the check that year. I mean, you were a bad motherfucker. I mean, I don't know what else to say, dude. That was a bad year, man, dude, for a lot of guys.
Yeah, we did win some races. I won the Kenny Simpson.
Yep. Oh yeah, Scott, Billy, Purvis, all of them. They were there. I was there that night and it was an ass whooping too. It wasn't like anybody was in your league that night either.
Yeah, that car was good. And then the car broke. The rear end broke, I think, in that car at the Jackson. The only thing kept me from not winning. I think I could have won the Jackson that year as well, but like we had mechanical problems that night. But anyways, we even raced. The World Outlaws was trying to get started back in '89 when I drove for. We kicked around and went out in Iowa and run some three World Outlaw races out there that summer. But yeah, we won some races, a lot of races, and done a lot of traveling, and went some different tracks. Went down to Tennessee, down into Scott's neck of the woods, and started down there in Atomic. Of course, that track's no longer there anymore.
Right.
We went there, and they used to have the Hall of Fame race, the Hall of Fame 100 down there.
Yep.
That's
when you ran into Billy Ogle, and all the Ogles were down there.
Yep.
Gosh, this is awesome.
The RJ5. Yeah.
Oh yeah, well, Ronnie Johnson.
Chattanooga
Ronnie Johnson, he was the cat daddy down there.
Yeah, he was too.
Yes, he was.
Freddie was good down there. And a lot of them guys down in that neck of the woods was different guys that I had never raced against,
Right.
Anyways, I got introduced to those kind of tracks down there that were like asphalt pretty much, high bank, high speed, rubbered up. They raced in the daytime a lot down in that neck of the woods, and so it was all different styles of racing and different people, and yeah.
John, how many wins you got in your career? How many? I mean, we know we could go on. What are we ballparking here?
300 and something. I don't know, 370, 380.
Yep. I was telling Gordy it had to be north of 300.
Yeah.
I mean, you've been. I'll tell you what. There's a big race this year at Tri-City. Yeah. And the World of Outlaws are here in September, and I know the Gundaker family would give anything to see John Gill show up and be a part of it.
Yeah.
This weekend. That weekend, it would be awesome.
Yeah,
John.
we got a big 2-day deal. It's a Friday, Saturday. It's a 10 on Friday and 25,000 on Saturday. We'd, if you had any inkling to make a drive over, we'd make sure we took care of you. It'd be cool to have you out. I bet you and Dad could tell stories for a few hours.
And I would just love to put a microphone be in the middle and let some of these guys. I mean, the fans deserve this.
Well, like I said, I've done a lot of racing at Grant City. I never on that track they have today, but yeah, I sure did. I sure did look forward to coming over there. I came over there once. 3 or 4 times. It got rained out there in St. Charles. It seemed to rain every time I came over there.
Yeah, it hasn't changed, I guess.
It hasn't changed.
Yeah, it's a long drive for me. I mean, it would be sunshine and drive and get within 50 miles of that track and get rained out.
Yep. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, hell, we were supposed to have a Summer Nationals race there on Wednesday, and it was 95 all day, sun shining, and at 5:15 as we were rolling over there, a pop-up shower, it rained for 20 minutes like a monsoon, and it flooded us out.
I guess things ain't changed any, has it?
Nope, nothing's changed. So
I think I went 3 times to a weekly race that they had in midweek at St. Charles. That's where I used to listen to all the stories from. That's where I met Larry Phillips, to be quite honest with you. I sat there in his truck with him and about choked to death as he smoked a carton of cigarettes while he was telling all these stories. But, yeah, it rained a lot. It seemed to rain a lot over in that neck of the woods. But I guess the White City track's no longer around, is it?
Nope. St. Charles is gone. It's been gone about 15, 20 years now. Yeah. It's
the White Tri-City, it was a big old track, kind of like Granite City, but it didn't have no wall around.
Right. Yep.
Had a lot of trees around it.
Yeah.
Yeah, hey, I watched the guy run off the track and down over that bank in the tree. I didn't even realize he went off until I seen the trees falling. That's the true story now, I'm telling you.
Oh, shit. That's
You go to get paid, you had to go into Motorcycle Clubhouse up there to get paid by the Harley riders, you know?
Oh, shit. Yeah, it was a different time back then, that's for sure.
What do you like about today? You know, let's talk a little bit about today. You're watching a little bit of it, and with the cars and everything's changed. I'd love to get John Gill's thoughts on dirt late model racing today.
Well, today's racing, they do run hard. You know what I'm saying? I mean, them cars, I don't know about all of that slide job business. You know what I'm saying? I mean, that's kind of unethical back in the day, really, of how they race today, I think. But they seem everybody deals with it and they roll with it. And, you know, they have several lead changes most of the time in most of the races. And as a fan to go watch, that's what people come to watch, you know. And it's not usually a 1 and 2 battle. It's usually a 4 or 5 car battle during a period of a race, which that's what everybody likes. I mean, you know, as a fan, that's what you want to see, you know, competition, I guess. I just don't like the expense of the race and where it's got today. And there's things that I definitely feel like I guarantee you that somebody could do, like reinvent the UMP thing for the cheaper part of the race and where people could afford it.
Yeah.
They've got away from their grassroots. You know what I'm saying? No one tries to help anybody anymore on cost. It's all about, you know, all you can spend, the most you can spend, and don't give two shits. Who cares?
Yeah.
You know.
Oh, you're exactly right.
That part I don't agree with, because I know there's only minute things that's minor that they could change in those cars that could take that value equation out of it.
Right. Yep.
And it's simple. It ain't something that you'd have to have tech inspectors and, you know, magnifying glasses and, you know, looking, you know, you wouldn't have to have a damn metal detector to go in and find out what to police the deal. It's just a few minor things that they could change on those cars, and they could take a lot of the expense out of it, but they don't.
No.
Well, and I think one of the things I've always said, you know, in recent years, I think the problem that we have now is that everybody's got their hands in everybody's pockets. And, you know, the chassis manufacturers sponsor the series, the shock brand sponsor series, the tire. I was just going to say the tire brands, you know, they've got to kick back in some way and not. And yeah, I think that's a huge issue we have now is that, you know, I don't want to call it greed because I don't think necessarily that's what it is. That's the word that comes to mind, but it's like, you know, everybody wants a piece of the pie and they don't feel the need to cut back on costs. They feel like, you know, the more we drive it up, the better it is, which is exactly wrong for the racer.
Yeah, it doesn't improve the racing. It only eliminates the average person. You know what I'm saying? And at some point, you can see what it's done to NASCAR, and you know where that's going. I mean, you got to know where it's coming. You know where it's going to go, where it's going to end up, and eventually that's where it's headed to. And it's a narrow track down that road. You know what I'm saying? But you know, originally when UMP started, like I said, there was cast iron blocks only, no belt drive fuel pumps. Everybody run methanol. You know, it was a cheaper fuel to run, and of course, we didn't run the 100 lappers and stuff. You know, your summer national races, exception of the Herald Review, was all 40 lap races. Some of them 50, but mostly 40 or 50. But you could run that on methanol. You know what I'm saying? And And today, even still today, it's a third of the cost of gasoline,
Yep.
And but that's the difference in racing. But like you said, everybody wants a piece of the pie. Everybody wants the track promoter wants somebody to help them pay for the purse, and that's how they get the big purses.
Yeah.
And and I understand that, but at some point in time, you got to look at the big picture. Even if the purse wasn't as much, if you could run for half, if it cost you half as much to build a car, you could run for a little less money. It didn't have to be $100,000 to win race. It can still be 25,000. You know what I'm saying? I mean, when the first time I won the Summer Nationals, the biggest paying race of the year in the Summer Nationals was $2,000. You figure that, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
But people still did it, you know what I'm saying? But a motor didn't cost, back then, a motor cost to rebuild. You could rebuild a motor for $1,200.
Yeah.
You could buy, I'll give you a scenario. In 1986, when Gene and I won the Summer Nationals and the UMP Point Championship, we had three motors: a 355 cast iron block, a 400 cast iron block with a cast iron crank, and a 430 that had a steel crank in it, a cast iron block with a steel crank in it. And he put those motors back then in the Racing News, Mid-American, whatever it was, for sale. Take your pick, $5,000. Now between those three motors, we had won 20-some features that year, and up near $70,000 or $80,000 of total purse winnings. And you could have bought any of those motors, take your pick, for $5,000. Nowadays, you can't even buy a set of shocks for that.
No, you sure as hell can't.
You see what I'm saying? And so you put the money in perspective. You was way better off back then. You know what I'm saying? We ran methanol. It costs $7 to get into the track. You know what I'm saying? At the most $10. You know what I'm saying? The big shows maybe was $12 or $15 or something. You know what I'm saying? It's just now you look what it costs to get in, and fuel to get down the road. Everybody's got a semi truck, and you got 3 or 4 people. You got 2 or 3 people you got to pay to go to the track with you. No one paid no one back then.
Right.
Everybody loved it. You watched, you went to go be a part of it, and just enjoy it, but now it's no one does it for the enjoyment. They're doing it because they're doing it for money.
Yep. Yeah, but it's way more of a business these days.
Yeah, it's more of a business deal. And like I said, the first race I won in 1981 paid $3,000. In today's world, that would be $50,000.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? If you look at the perspective and what it cost, So that part of the racing I don't like, where it's headed. I can see where it's going, and I love to watch them races. I love to watch the competition. I like to watch them run hard and not tear nobody up. You know what I'm saying? It's good, clean racing. Everybody's learned to live with those slide jobs and deal with it. And but I don't like the fact that it costs $1 million to try to do it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it absolutely does. I mean, I know we ran the Outlaw Tour in 22 and 23. In 22, we didn't have any motor issues, anything along those lines. And, without buying motors, just the cost, in tires and fuel and those things to get up and down the road that year, which we're a smaller team, we spent about $150,000 that year. The next year, we ended up hurting 3 motors, and had issues, and we damn near spent double of that just in, because we had motor bills and things like that. And, for me, it was a big eye-opening experience because it was like, man, we can't afford to do this unless you got somebody just flipping the bill.
Yeah.
And even if you do, it's like, well, why the hell would we do it this way? If we got that much money, you could just go bounce around and do whatever you want, and you could race forever. But it's really unfortunate because it's run a lot of guys out that were regional racers, or guys that really even just wanted to do it at a local level. They can't even afford to do it anymore because you can't just go buy a regular motor anymore these days and even be half competitive or an older car. Because nobody will help you.
No, and the thing about it, the bad thing I see where this whole sport's going today, the part that I don't like is, like I said, like originally back in the day, there had local cars at local tracks that were hard to outrun. Well, nowadays, the local cars can't even begin to compete against the touring cars.
Yep.
They're not in the same ballpark. They're not in the same league. And it's not no lack of respect for the cars or the car drivers or any of that. It's just because of the technical part of it and the amount of money that they don't have to spend.
Yep.
You're 100% right. 100%.
I mean, that is exactly where that picture falls in there at. And when that happens, then you got the touring cars that come into town and have a race, and your local cars have to take provisional to get in the show. And so now that makes them look like a bunch of chumps.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, they're out there spending their hard-earned money that they really can't afford with a family, trying to just to race, and then they look like monkeys when the cars come to town. And it's embarrassing to them, and it's embarrassing to the local cars in general, but it's not out of lack of respect. It's just where the sport's going.
Yeah. Yep.
Can you imagine being in a bar and hanging out with this guy?
Oh man, I don't know. I hope I get the chance. Yeah. Yeah, John, we're gonna have to. You
gotta come in, John.
We're
We
gonna
need
have to
you in
belly up to a
September.
bar and tell some more of these stories.
We
'cause
need you in September.
I need to hear them. So
we need to really make this, and we need to probably wind this thing down. And but I can't. First of all, man, I can't thank you enough for coming on with us. Our show's growing. This is what it's all about. I know that Gordy's tickled. You know, we both are.
Hey, you have to come to town because you got to re-sign my John Gill shirt. The Sharpies wore off a little bit, so I got to get you to re-sign it.
That's right.
Let me tell you, before we get off here, I really appreciate you calling me, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you. And and like I said, I love racing. I still love it today, and I still take my hat off to them guys that get out there and do it because I know how much work it is. It's not all fun and games and Tootsie Rolls running up down the road. We didn't have video games that everybody could play on going down the road back then. You had to sit there and sweat your balls off and hope the guy driving didn't fall asleep and kill everybody.
Oh shit, that's the truth right there. Yeah, you couldn't stare at a phone all the way down the road.
It's incredible.
No, if you got broke down, you better be able to fix it because you couldn't call nobody to help.
Yeah, that's right. Well, yeah, John. Well, we really appreciate you, man, and thank you thank you for everything you've done for the sport of dirt racing and always being the guy that you were. I promise you, there's a lot of people that still talk about John Gill, and it's all good things.
Yes.
And that's what's cool about you is I felt like you always did it the right way and carried yourself in the right manner, and that's why you had as much success as you did and why you landed in as many good rides as you did.
Well, I appreciate that, and I met a lot of people along the way, like Don, and of course you was younger, but your father and your mother and even your grandpa I met, through the course of coming through that direction racing, and so many people along the way, and all over the Midwest and East and the South and everywhere. It's been a pleasure for me.
Awesome.
Well, we can't thank you again enough, man, and we want to see you.
Yeah.
I think that's the big thing. The next, they always talk about the next step, right? The next step is we got to see your ass at Tri-City in September. I'm going to work on that. You stay at my place, whatever. We're going to figure this shit out.
Yeah.
Gordy, have your dad call me.
I will. I'll
done.
Yep. I'll have him give you a call, and we'll work it out and get you out here one way or another. And yeah, we'd love to have you, and it would be a neat deal to have you out there for the weekend.
Kevin's really busy on the racetrack and things. Otherwise, we really wanted him bad to be in here tonight to talk to you because, you know.
I understand that. So that's good. Well, good speaking with everybody. And
yep.
I'll be in touch with you along the road.
I want to see you. I want to see you here in September.
All right. Thank you, John. We appreciate it.
All right.
Yes, sir.
All right. Be good.
Bye. Man.
Dude,
you can't beat that guy
legend.
right there.
Fucking legend.
I'm telling you, that was as good as it gets from a racing and fan perspective at the end of the day. I don't know how you could beat a conversation with a guy like that.
From the minute we started this, knowing I've been blessed to be around John Gill. Always treated me with the utmost respect. He's a little kid walking in the pit area in my shorts and my T-shirt. That guy there's a reason why when you went to Summer National Racing in Charleston, Illinois, it didn't matter where you went, Northern All-Stars, he was a major because of the way he treated.
Oh, yeah.
There's not – his fan base is bigger than anybody ever realizes it is.
Oh, absolutely.
He was just one of the most – still is one of the most respected people in dirt track racing.
100%. Yeah, I mean, I know as a kid, you know, getting to be around him some and, you know, just – how cool he was in general, walking in through the pit area, and you know, I've got a super cool stash of die-cast cars at home that I was lucky because of Dad that a lot of these guys would give me them, and I might have to bring it in here one day because it's full of all the guys that I just idolized growing up, and I only have about 10 big scale cars, and there was a reason that I only had them. It was the guys that I really liked, and it was John, Scott, Billy. I have the Kenny Schrader Budweiser 25.
That's very cool.
You know, and I have Mike Duvall. You know, Jeff Purvis, and those guys I really looked up to growing up, and it's neat for one to have a conversation like that with him. You know, I probably haven't seen John since I was 8 years old, but you know, I've heard obviously I've watched him race a million times, but you know, that
second at the dream to Scott.
Yeah,
you know? I mean, the guy people forget about of how many big races he competed in to the highest level, and naturally inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2013. I knew the win totals were big, but it was when you went to those big races, he performed.
Yeah.
And
it's almost, you know, you don't want to say it wasn't a lack of not winning big races, because he won big races, but you know, he never maybe had that big over the top win that was like, oh, John Gill's here, you know, but goddamn, you knew if he was in the pit area, you knew you had to beat him, you know. Absolutely. And that was one of the things that I think a lot of people. It's cool hearing from him, sitting there saying, "Well, I just wanted to race. It wasn't for the money. I just wanted to race." And the story with Godsey, that is unbelievable. I had never heard that.
I had no idea.
That is.
No idea.
Man, we might have to get. You know, I don't even. Is something you never even hear of. You know, but. That's the kind of guy. John didn't do that stuff for the limelight. He didn't do it so people knew that he was doing it. So, man, kudos to him for that. That's one of the neatest stories I've probably ever
Me too,
heard.
Gord.
So,
I agree.
Yeah,
folks, I don't know if you get a chance to check this out. This is one you're really, especially you know, there's some people out there. If you know your dad knew some of these old time racers a little bit, who paved the way for a lot of the superstars that we have today.
Yeah.
And we're keeping their memories alive. And if you didn't enjoy this one, man, then lose our number or lose this.
I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah.
Yeah. What did Kyle Busch say at that time? He said, if you didn't like that, then just don't even watch. I'd say that's it for sure. I'm
going to let Gordy close her down tonight for us. And again, thank you all for listening to the Dirt Parlor, and hope you appreciate what we're doing here.
Yeah. Thank you guys again. And, there's going to be a lot of really cool episodes like these coming up. We have a lot of big things on tap, some big stuff that we've been working on that leading up to Knoxville in August, and some stuff I think it's going to be really neat. So we appreciate everybody that has been along for this ride so far. Obviously, we're just getting started. So make sure you like and subscribe on YouTube. Give us a follow on Facebook and Twitter or X, whatever it is now. And, we're just super appreciative to everybody that's behind us with this deal. So thank you guys for tuning in. And until next week, we'll see you later.
Thank you.